Hello and welcome to Improving Scottish Football. My name is Kieran, and today on the show I've got one of Scotland's best football journalists, Graeme McGarry, who writes for the Herald. So we're going to kick things off today with chatting about the current media landscape, how things are changing and why we get so many clickbait articles, and why there's a need for a more intelligent conversation on Scottish football. We're then going to talk about VAR. Generally, it's been a subject I've tried to avoid, but at some point you've just got to address it. And it's worth noting we recorded this before the Celtic Rangers game on Sunday. We'll look at whether what we're doing is sustainable, and we'll look over to Sweden as a potential alternative example for us to follow. And lastly, we're going to talk about how we can improve the marketing of Scottish football, building and defining our product. So please do like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Please leave a 5-star review, that would be hugely appreciated and help us grow the channel. Let's keep this going. Let's improve Scottish football. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Graeme McGarry. Graeme, how are you?
Very well, thanks Kieran. Thanks for having me on.
Good, well I'm delighted you agreed to come on. Why don't you start out by giving us a quick introduction to yourself and obviously your connection to Scottish football?
Sure. My name's Graeme McGarry. I work for the Herald, as you said. I'm a senior sports writer with the Herald, and I think that was a title given in sort of lieu of a pay rise rather than any expertise that I may have. So I've been doing that now for just over a decade, I guess, 11 years or so at the Herald. In terms of my connection to Scottish football, just grew up a massive fan. I was a Motherwell supporter as a kid. My dad took me to all the games, and I always say to my son now, who's had that inflicted upon him as well. When I started going, it was Davy Cooper and Bobby Russell and guys like this that were playing, and when he started going, it was guys like Jermaine Hilton. So I think I get the better end of that sort of deal. But yeah, so I just started going from there. I kind of realised that I wasn't going to be good enough to play at any sort of level beyond the Sunday pub league. I had a gift for English at school, and my writing was pretty solid. So I thought, I can't believe you can actually do this for a living. Just go and watch football and give your opinions on it, and someone will pay you to do that. So that was the kind of the plan. But actually, when I left uni, I got kind of waylaid a little bit. I'd written to every paper in the country. Didn't get one response, and I didn't have a great deal of work behind me, and I think that was the issue. But at that time, you're sort of early 20s, you're full of bravado and thinking, yeah, I can do this. But yeah, so had to kind of scrape about doing media sales jobs and things like that while I was trying to get my foot in the door, and eventually, just doing a lot of work experience. Got a job at the Herald selling ads first and foremost, whilst I was still studying and still doing bits and bobs here and there, and eventually get picked up by the Press Association, and started doing matches for them, and as I say, going to press conferences in my free time for the Evening Times as well at that point, and then days off, things like that. It's just what you need to do, I guess, to get a foot in the door. And then eventually, after a couple of years of doing that, an opening came up and I was lucky enough to get it, and yeah, and 10, 11 years later, here I am, and still clinging on by the fingernails.
Okay, so you've had 11 years at the Herald. How do you think the media landscape has changed in that time? Obviously, kind of newspaper readership has, generally declined across the board. I think it's fair to say. Have you noticed any other kind of shifts in the media, or maybe in particular how Scottish football is covered?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say it's not a coincidence that when I came in, it started to decline very rapidly. But yeah, there's a massive difference. I mean, I think probably from our point of view, resource is the big thing. When I started, we had, I think, 14 full-time writers across the Sunday Herald, the Herald and the Evening Times as it was then for sport. We've now got 2, myself and Matthew Lindsay, who concentrate solely on Herald, so it shows you the resources is massively dwindled since I started. And yeah, there's had to be a massive shift in the way that we approach our coverage, because obviously people's habits, how they consume the media, has changed so much. Even myself, you spend more time flicking through your phone. I always make a point of getting a paper now and again just to say that I'm buying it and supporting the industry. But yeah, most of my stuff I get online as well. So you've got to be cognizant of that, and you've got to sort of tailor your coverage as as it follows. So I think as well, there is a saying, you get the media you deserve, and I think there's so much emphasis now on clicks and engagement and how long people are reading your stories and things like that. That we're so aware of that every day, of what stories do well, and that's when I think we fall into this kind of rabbit hole of going just for the big sort of Rangers man says something about Celtic man, because that's what people click on, and it always gets loads of clicks, loads of engagement, and you kind of fall into the trap of saying, well, that's what the people want, so we should do that all the time, whereas then you pick up the paper and that stuff's in the paper as well, and it just doesn't really work. So yeah, it's been a huge learning curve, I think, in the media to try and think, where do we go now from here, from the sort of traditional way of doing things, sort of transitioning to this new age that we're all in, and trying to make it work and trying to make it viable, but also try to give people some quality in their media coverage as well, that and we don't just, as I say, focus on man hitting out at another man.
I know. Honestly, the amount of like clickbait stories that are just still about like Morelos and Jota more than anything, like you still see that cropping up all the time. It's like, guys, give it a rest. Like they left Scottish football a long time ago,
Yeah.
And
Well,
I mean, I just, one of the reasons I set up this podcast is I genuinely believe that there is an appetite for, people wanting, better conversations. I think people are getting jaded by a lot of that kind of clickbaity stuff. You're obviously trying to shift your kind of coverage into maybe exploring some of these topics, regarding how we improve Scottish football. Can you kind of talk about how that journey's been for you? If you had to fight to have these topics covered, or has it been a kind of natural evolution that you guys have realized that actually the Scottish football public actually want to discuss some of these bigger issues?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing I should recognise is that, a lot of those stories that, get your goat when you're clicking through Twitter and these clickbait headlines, what I should say is that, there is without that, I think it would be very difficult to feasibly do the more quality stuff as well.
Okay.
That does pay for a lot of the time that the guys like myself could go away and spend maybe a week doing a story, or 2 weeks doing a story, which we have done in the past. We've done investigations into, gambling in football and different things like the SPFL. We've looked, deeply into the way that organisation is run, and without the sort of clickbait stuff getting done by the digital guys who do a great job, don't get me wrong, in terms of what they do, we probably couldn't do that. So like it or lump it, I think that's also here to stay. I think it's a sort of vital part of the sort of media biosphere, if you like, and it makes it possible for us to do the other stuff. That being said, yes, there's been a huge recognition certainly within our sports department. I can't speak for anyone else, but I think if you look across the board, places like the Daily Mail are doing some great stuff. The Times, before they sort of cut back on a lot of their staff, unfortunately, we're doing some great stuff, and Michael Grant there still does a great job. So I think there is a recognition from maybe the sort of broadsheets, if you like, that there has to be, an evolution of what we're doing, because there is this other market out there of, more refined, I don't want to say more refined, but you know what I'm driving at there, that there's people who want a more mature, I think probably is the best phrase, sports coverage and football coverage in Scotland. And I think there's certainly the talent there to do it. I think there's the appetite to do it. But it's just about making it work. That's the thing, making it financially viable. And I think we've been very lucky in terms of the leadership that's come in at the Herald has been very receptive to these sort of kind of approaches from myself and Big Matthew Lindsay, who have been trying to kind of push that, we should be doing this and we should be looking at different areas. And we've been given the sort of room to do that. And it's been really well received. I've been actually surprised myself at how much people have, actually responded really well to the coverage that we're doing in those areas, And now and again, I might need to do, some manager hitting out at a ref or whatever it may be, and I think there is a place for that. But as I say, I think that's given us the platform to then go on service that other market, which I think is absolutely there.
Okay, that's really interesting to hear that. Yeah, to hear that. And you did a great article with Grant Russell, a few weeks ago. I think if anyone's not read that, I think they should go and seek it out. That's the sort of coverage which I think I'm sure you got probably quite a high readership for that. I would have guessed. I mean,
Yeah,
it certainly did the rounds on Twitter. People really appreciating that kind of level of conversation. The topics that were discussed. Do you have plans then to do more stuff regarding, improving Scottish football?
yeah, absolutely. So, we've been talking about this for quite some time, and partly off the back of the article that I did with Grant, which, as you say, it was received very well. And actually, one of the key things about that was, and something that really encouraged probably the powers that be, the guys above my pay grade, to keep doing this, is that subscriptions on the back of that article were really high. So I think there's an appetite for people to pay for journalism when it's quality. So the clickbait stuff, I think you can't survive on that alone. I think especially if you have a paper like the Herald who, no matter your opinions that I'm told on a daily basis, that maybe it's not quite the quality of the sports coverage it used to be when guys like Hugh were there instead of me, Hugh McDonald. But we're trying our best, and I think that people are willing to pay for coverage when it is, of that sort of quality. So on the back of that article, we've been looking at different areas and what we can do to sort of drive that conversation forward. And we'll be doing, certainly, I think the initial idea was to maybe do a series on improving Scottish football, and that was just the sort of banner headline. So obviously when you got in touch, Kieran, it was it's sort of the synergy was right there, We've sort of expanded that since to maybe think, maybe this is an overarching strategy that we should have in terms of our sports coverage, and not just do 1 week of here's how we can improve Scottish football, and here's 4 conversations we've had, and here's a bit about the TV, and here's a bit about the marketing or whatever it may be. Rather that, look at all those areas, absolutely, but let's keep the conversation going, keep it bubbling along, and see where we can do it, rather than just going out in a blaze of glory and then slipping back into the kind of the old ways, if you like. So I think, yeah, we're going to absolutely do a sort of intro to that approach with a few kind of strong articles, I think, looking at various areas of the Scottish game where I think people are already having these conversations. I think people are talking about it, and I think it's a platform that really needs to be given to people like Grant Russell, like probably yourself, Kieran, who's heard from loads of guys within the game, stakeholders within the game who've got great ideas and great energy and really care about Scottish football and its future. They've got to be given that platform. We've got to open that conversation up. So, yeah, that's what we want to do going forward, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. I think we're certainly going to get the time, I think, to have these conversations. And if there's anyone out there who wants to get in touch with me and they've got ideas that they want to discuss, then yeah, we're all ears. And yeah, let's kind of open it up and see where we can go.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'm just, behind everyone who wants to have this conversation. And that's a big reason I started up the podcast is just to try and get this conversation going. I'm not precious about it in any way. I just want us, because the thing is, I truly believe so many people are having these conversations, in the pubs with their friends, but also I know that there's a lot of quite senior people in Scottish football who do listen to this podcast. There's chief executives at clubs. There's managers who listen to this, and people at those senior levels are having these conversations. So it's just about bringing these ideas out and just openly talking about them, and because it's still, for some reason, just still not fully in the mainstream yet.
Yeah.
But hopefully in the next few years we can, collectively drive that forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was probably of a mind before we started doing this, maybe a year or two ago, that there maybe wasn't an audience out there. I thought it was pretty niche. I was always very interested in these conversations, and I'd maybe had these conversations with guys like Grant, guys like Alan Burrows behind the scenes. You're standing about before a press conference one day, and you're just sort of shooting the breeze, and you're always talking about these things, and you always think, who's clicking on that again. It's shifting that mindset of who's clicking on it, rather than maybe people would subscribe to this, to read about this, because yeah, as you say, I think there's a massive appetite out there to have these conversations from the fan base, and as you say, within the game as well. You talk to these senior guys, there's a sort of tendency to think that when you speak about things like the SPFL and the way they do things, or the marketing or the TV deal, that it's all negative. That everybody's having a go and think, hang Neil Doncaster from the rafters and get burn the Blazers and all the rest of it. But I think actually these guys, at a level, they want what's best for Scottish football as well. So vilifying them and making out that they're incompetent sometimes is not the best approach. I think we need to, yeah, absolutely hold them to account, and I think we've been trying to do that specifically, I guess, with Neil Doncaster. We've had a lot of kind of stories surrounding the way that he's conducted himself. But yeah, we have to try and, I know it's a difficult thing for Scottish football to do, but try and work together, and try and be collaborative in the approach that we have in terms of, how can we drive this forward, rather than just saying, yeah, we should get a better TV deal. How do we do that? How do we drive that forward? We should get rid of artificial pitches. These are all the kind of hot button topics you hear about all the time. Okay, what's the solution? How do we drive it forward? There doesn't seem to be a lot of attention on the detail of that. There's usually just a lot of kind of bluster about we should do it and these guys are incompetent. That's the sort of tone of the coverage that has been so far. So yeah, it's about changing that, and hopefully these guys will be receptive to speak to us as well if we do go in with that sort of attitude.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's turn this conversation on to some changes that you would like to see in Scottish football, because I know there's a couple of areas in particular that you care passionately about. So what would you like to talk about first? Do you want to talk about VAR, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a topic as well, and it sort of feeds into, I guess, the media coverage of VAR, because there's a tendency, I think, and I've been guilty of this in the past myself, to focus on sort of individual VAR decisions and calls that have been obviously erroneous, and managers getting hurt up about it. And that seems to be, I think, I love listening to Radio Scotland of a weekend, coming back for games or whatever it may be. But again, I think a lot of the time it's just VAR is, it's a shambles and it's this and that. And I agree with all that, absolutely. I'm not a fan of VAR. I'll lay my cards on the table. I don't like it. But what I would like to see is a conversation around, first of all, how can we improve it? If it is here just now, how do we improve it? How do we stop the sort of insidious influence it's having in the game, and the creeping influence that it's having? Because I think it's venturing into areas where it's not really needed. And I think what's been ignored is the sort of fan experience a lot of the time. Like when I'm in the press box, sometimes you're quite lucky. You've got a monitor there or something, and you can see replays, and there's conversations about what's been happening, and you're being fed information sometimes as well by people within the game. When you're sitting in the stand, if I go with my sons to a game, you've no idea. You've no idea what's going on.
Oh, it's painful.
Oh, I was at the recent Motherwell Aberdeen game, for instance, and there was Motherwell had a goal disallowed, and it was a 3-minute wait before Willie Collum went over to look at the screen. He then went over, there was another wait, and then the goal was disallowed, and nobody really knew why. So things like that, communication, all that sort of stuff, that's a conversation that has to be had. The referees themselves can't be happy with the way it's going, because it's highlighting major deficiencies in their decision making, and obviously a lot of these decisions are also subjective, so it's opening up debate. And yeah, I don't think it's healthy the way the debate is being framed at the moment. It's all about the referees' incompetency. So for me, it's not a big bad refs thing. I think VAR was a well-meaning idea that has in practice proven to be incompatible with football in the way that football is played. That works in sports like rugby, it works in cricket. These are sports with natural stoppages, and I think the flow of football is what makes it unique. The joy of celebrating a goal, these things have all been said, I guess. But these are the things that, on a material level, when I was sitting at that game, I didn't. My son, who's 12, wasn't celebrating the goal, because you just never know, And I just, yeah. As you can tell, I've got a lot to get off my chest about VAR, but it is one of those areas of the game that I think we could. It's an easy win, We could do things. We could tweak the process to make it, better for both spectators and the players, and obviously the most important people, I think, the fans as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like everyone else, I've been in the stadium and just had the joy sucked out of you. When you celebrate a goal, and then it's like you're doing a 2, 3, 4 minute wait, and the longer it goes on, you're just like, oh man.
Yeah.
And
Um,
it's interesting. I was in favor of it coming in personally. Because I feel like that was the way the world was going, and it was either kind of you get on board or or you're going to be left behind.
yeah.
But certainly, if you were to ask me just now if I wanted VAR in its current form or no VAR, I would go for no VAR.
Yeah.
But I do feel there's so much scope for improvement that I do feel things can be improved. I think for me, I would like to know, maybe at the end of the season, maybe over the summer, I would really like to know some concrete plans, or have some sort of strategy spelt out as to how VAR is going to be changed going forward,
Mm.
i.e., these 4 minute waits in the stadium, with no information being passed is just, yeah, painful
Yeah.
was the word I used. Like, it just ruins the experience. And I do feel sorry for the refs, like just
Mm.
standing there with their finger to their ear in the middle of the pitch
Yeah.
before they're called across to the monitor. It's just, I don't think the current situation is benefiting anyone. I think it's a lose-lose situation all round currently.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think my initial view would be, I mean, I agree. If I was given a choice today, I certainly would. I would get rid of VAR altogether. However, if the clubs, I think there's enough people within the clubs. I know that the attitudes have shifted from probably your attitude at the start of the season, Kieran, within the game. I think attitudes have shifted significantly now towards paring it right back. Goal line technology, maybe offsides, as a matter of fact. Even then, sometimes that gets my goat because there's maybe a millimetre offside or something like that. I think my biggest thing, VAR goes against the kind of spirit of the game. I think fans want to see goals. They don't want to see instants getting poured over just to see a tiny infraction somewhere. I think it runs anti football for my tastes. And yeah, I think my first thing would be to improve it would be to pare it right back, and see if we can get that right first and foremost. Can we have a system where you have offsides and you have goal line technology and perhaps maybe penalties, something like that? Because the handball rule obviously is a big factor in this as well.
Mm,
It's a shambles as it is. Um,
yeah.
let's get those kind of basics right before we venture into things like the force of a challenge in the middle of the pitch, which obviously, as everyone knows, when it's slowed down and you look at it, still images. It's like there's been numerous occasions this year where challenges which have looked like, there's just nothing in it. And I've not played football at any kind of level, but anyone who's played football at all knows when a player's trying to do someone, and when it's maybe just been a forceful tackle. And I think we've seen players sent off unjustly this year because of it. I also
Mm,
think it's inhibiting referees, like referees who maybe in the past were very, headstrong about making a decision. You can sense there's hesitancy in their decision making now, particularly when it comes to penalties. You look at the one at McDiarmid Park recently, which was Rangers. Dujon Sterling was fouled by Andy Considine, I think it was, and it was a stonewall penalty. I mean, the
mm,
referee Matthew McDermott on the day, who, by the way, I think is a good young referee, is looking right at it and he doesn't give it. And the reason being is because he knows it's more difficult to overturn a penalty award once you've looked at
mm,
VAR than it is to give the penalty um, after consulting VAR. So I think they're falling back on it. It's become a crutch, and it's just not working for, as you say, for anyone. So
mm.
yeah, my thing would be pare it right back. Let's get to offsides, goal line technology, maybe penalties at a push, and the rest of it, let's just leave it out of the game.
Mm. And when we were talking, before we recorded, you were saying that Sweden don't have it. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about what they decided to do?
Yeah, so in Sweden they have a model where every club is basically beholden to their fans because there's a 50+1 ownership model where the fans have the final say in any sort of strategic decisions. So I think a lot of people look at fan ownership and they think, oh, well, I don't want my big mate Tam there making decisions on transfers or whatever, which is, I think a lot of detractors look at it that way, but it's not like that. You still have your experts in place, your CEOs and everything like that. But the difference being over there is that you can't ignore the fans' wishes. I'm not saying that's what clubs here do. A lot of them are very good now. I think you look at St Mirren, you look at Motherwell, you look at clubs of that ilk who do listen to their supporters. But over in Sweden, they had to have a vote to get this through. The fans were very much steadfastly against it. Therefore, the clubs voted against it, and they've just not got it. And as a result, the attendances in the Allsvenskan, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, in the Swedish league
Yeah.
have increased. The fan, the fan going experience is still the same as it was before, and they've really leaned into this unique aspect where this is our league for the fans, and we're just not going to have that. And whether pressure from UEFA or FIFA, whatever comes to bear in the future, we'll wait and see. But for now, they've decided not to go down that route, and I would have loved Scottish football to sort of do that as well. And I think this is something Scottish football really has to do more, is lean into this sort of idea that there's nowhere else like this for football. And there isn't, it's a unique football atmosphere in Scotland. Thriving fan scene. The football might not always be the best quality, but it's always competitive on the pitch. And yeah, I think that's what Scottish football is. When people think about Scottish football, and this goes into the sort of marketing conversation that we might have in a minute, Kieran, but that's what we should be looking at doing, is leaning right into it and saying Scottish football is sort of like who's like us, and really selling the game that way. Not as we have in the past. I think tried to just ape the English game. I think I mentioned to you previously when we spoke that the year that the league was rebranded as the Premiership and the Championship and League One and League Two, which at the time was what the English Premier League was called, I wanted to scream, because you're never going to compete with the English League. It's gone. It's miles. It's light years away from what the Scottish League will ever be in terms of finance and quality and everything else. But what is it about Scottish football that people would be attracted to that have been turned off of the EPL in recent years? There's loads going for it. And I think people are looking for that more authentic, old school football experience. And that's what Scottish football could offer them if they would just shout about it a wee bit and just lean into it. I think that's where I would go with it, because listen, I like the English Premier League. It's fine. I'll watch match of a day on a Saturday night. But it's not even close to Scottish football for what it offers. It's, to me, there's an emotion and a energy about Scottish football that sets it apart, and I think that's what we should be selling it as.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this does bring us really nicely onto the topic of marketing and how we sell ourselves. Yeah, this is obviously a huge thing. It's been a running conversation throughout the whole series of episodes I've done, because pretty much everyone agrees we do not sell ourselves in the right way. And I think, fundamentally it comes down to, what are we and what are we trying to be? We really need to build and define the product and, have a mission statement or have a top line, something that really brings everyone together, so that everyone knows the same values, what we stand for, but also so that the potential audience and the potential TV partners and sponsorship partners and everything know exactly what they're going to get with Scottish football. We are buying into Scottish football because we are going to get X, Y, and Z.
I think I'd like to think it's because of a lack of resource rather than a lack of ambition. And I would like the clubs themselves, who we always hear are the power brokers in Scottish football, to perhaps commit a slice of their budget, which I know times are tight and money's tight, but it wouldn't take a massive amount of money to really transform the way that the league and the game here in general sells itself. And there's got to be a kind of uniform approach to it. You don't want clubs all siloed away doing their own thing. What is, as you say, what is this overarching idea of what Scottish football is, and who is driving that message forward? So, to their credit, I think some of the guys at the SPFL now, in terms of their social media team, are doing some great stuff, selling the game. But, there's got to be something bigger. It can't just be a few tweets every week. The thing about Scottish football is it's got this massive engaged audience who care about it enough to pay £30 for a ticket every week, or £300, £400, £500 for a season ticket. We always talk about this line of, it's the best attended league per capita in Europe. Well, what do you know about these guys that go to the game? do you ever contact them? Do you ever tell them that, there's an offer going on? Or there's so much they could be doing. I think Grant touched upon this, and when I spoke to him for the piece, is that data is something that Scottish football is miles behind in. Because you could go out and sell yourself to sponsors, and we still don't have a league sponsor for next season, by the way. By saying, we've got so many thousands of engaged guys who love going to the football and are really engaged on a daily basis with this product. I hate calling it that, but the product. 10% of them own a car, or 90% of them own a car. 10% of them might want to buy a car in the next 3 months. We could have that data quite easily, but we don't. So when we're selling ourselves then to companies or even to TV companies for the TV deal, we don't actually have, the tools to say this is what we're offering. At the moment, what we're saying is we've got, 4 Rangers and Celtic games, and the odd Edinburgh derby. We don't even show all of them. That's not what Scottish football is. It might be what most people will watch, but there's so many stories under the surface, and one of the great frustrations, I guess, since, the resources from my point of view have dwindled, is that we don't really have the time to go out and discover some of that. I think, we've barely scratched the surface to tell the real story about what Scottish football is. And I would love someone just to take the bull by the horns, and I would love it to be the SPFL, just to say, right, okay, guys, why don't we commit £2 million a year between all the clubs, and let's just properly get a marketing team in place, centralised, and let's just sell the idea of what Scottish football is and see where that takes us, because I think it's great, I love it, and I think there's a wider audience for it as well. But we need to really sell it. The thing about the English Premier League is they rammed it down everyone's throats that this was the best league in the world, when objectively it wasn't at that time. You can argue the case now, it might be in terms of quality, but it's still a point of debate. What was not a point of debate was that all their marketing material was that it was the best league in the world and you should be watching this. And I think we should be doing that with our own USPs, which are the passion, the fan bases, the colour, just how competitive and the style of football, all of that stuff. And totally. let's be honest, the sort of madcap stuff that goes on around the place as well. So, yeah, I mean, to my mind, that there has to be a sort of unified approach to this, and it's what we spoke about before. We've got to work together, and it's a big ask in Scottish football to say that we should sacrifice a little bit of money for the greater good, but I think in the long run, clubs would benefit financially from it, because we'd be able to attract better sponsors, better TV deals, and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. A rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. The lack of resource. There's just simply not that many people who work at the SPFL. Yeah. And again, this has been another running theme throughout the podcast. People crying out, club chairmans, even just for everything to become a little bit more centralized, because it's just not economical. It's not efficient for every club to be, fighting their own corner, and to have it every club for themselves. In terms of, that lack of resource, however, when we are talking about how we market ourselves and how we're lacking a mission statement or a top line, even, I don't think that in itself takes that much resource.
Yeah.
I do think there is some really simple stuff, like defining the brand, that could be done with the current resources. And to kind of put that into perspective a little bit, a couple of years ago, it might have been last season, the SPFL ran with the tagline, "This is football."
Yeah.
And it seemed to be this new tagline that we were going to be running with. It didn't have a lot more context around it. And it's been completely dropped this year, but I just want to know what the thinking is behind that. Like, why that phrase? Why did we use it for a season? Why is it gone? Is there plans to have something replacing it?
Yeah.
Because even introducing something fairly simple, just that people can get behind and use as a hashtag. So
yeah,
I do think there are things that could be done in the meantime, but certainly diverting more resources to some sort of centralized pot, from the outside is a no-brainer. But of course, every club is, having to fight to survive. Finances are really tight. and so many clubs, it's hand to mouth. There was something you actually mentioned in the article with Grant, which was regarding, there was a few years where we didn't have a sponsor,
Yeah,
and then Ladbrokes came in, gave a couple £1 million, and I think Grant's argument at the time was, correct me if I'm wrong, he was like, no, why don't we just keep this £2 million as a centralized pot, right? That was
yeah,
what he was advocating.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so obviously Scottish football had survived for a few years without the money. But as you say, unfortunately, when there's money on the table, clubs are going to want it. You know that it is such a difficult thing to run a football club. I would never criticise clubs for doing that. However, at that moment, it had been evidenced to them that they could get by, not only get by, but get by quite comfortably
Mm.
without that £2 million, because the £2 million was shared between all of the clubs, so it's not massive amounts of money, and they decided at the time to ignore Grant and take the cash and probably sign some winger from Preston North End on loan or something, so
Mm.
instead. So it's very difficult to kind of, I guess, if you're a club chairman and you're in that situation and you're firefighting every day, it's very hard to step back and look at the bigger picture. But it's going to take that, it's going to take clubs. And I think there is an appetite. Listen, speaking to clubs within the game now, I think there is a lot of them who, have got their eye on this bigger picture now.
Yep.
Obviously, self-interest is the thing that's held Scottish football back for years. It's not unique to Scottish football, but it's a problem when you're trying to progress things. But I think there is a change of attitude. There is a shift now to say, do you know what? We need to do something to move the game forward. And everybody I speak to within the game certainly knows they can't do it on their own. So yeah, hopefully we'll move towards a situation here where people might, as you say, not only just put the resource into it, because I think that's vital. However, let's just get around a table and say, what are we actually doing to promote this brand? I think that "This is Football" line was actually a good tagline. I think that is pretty much the way Scottish football should be selling itself. This is real football, if you like, which is
Mm.
implied there. And forget all that, because I think people are really sickened by the sort of financial, uh, you know, imbalance that's in football now, and how the power is shifted away from countries like Scotland, and even the Champions League now. I think it's a bit of a turn off for some people because of that. And then we've got the talk of the European Super League. So yeah, but I think there's definitely potential there. There's a gap in the market for a league who comes in and just says, we're not these things. We're what football is. We're the football you remember when you used to go when you were a kid, and lean into that kind of nostalgia a wee bit, I guess. Yeah. So hopefully, as I said, hopefully the tide's shifting a little bit on that one, and I think it is, and I think hopefully in a couple of years we might be in a situation where we do have a clear understanding of, number one, what Scottish football is, and number two, how we're going to sell that to market.
Mm. Good. Oh, well, that's a nice optimistic note. I think we'll kind of draw the podcast towards a close. I think I
Well,
really
I think
do
that's
like.
that's a point to make though, Kieran, is that optimism and positivity is a thing we have to lean into as well, because we are very good here at talking the game down, and I've done it myself. I'm not going to have a go at anyone. I've done it hundreds of times, but yeah, what's positive about Scottish football? Not, oh geez, nobody's won the league with Glasgow since 1985 and or whatever it may be, and oh, the quality of football is rubbish, and no, it's every league has poor games, but we always accentuate the negative, and I would like to see, and certainly I'm trying my very best to do it on a daily basis, just to check myself, and make sure that we're talking about the positive things about the game, not dressing it up, but there is loads of positive stuff here that we can focus on rather than just always, talking ourselves down.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I'm fully behind you. I'll try not to be try not to be too negative or pessimistic. I mean, no. I think there's huge room for us to grow and develop. So it's just a case of hopefully that groundswell of opinion changing. And I do think obviously that there's definitely appetite. As we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, more people want to have these conversations,
Yep.
and hopefully that's a really positive sign. So, okay, before I let you go, Graeme, I'm going to ask the question I ask every guest,
Yep.
which is, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about Scottish football, what would it be?
Can I be a bit greedy and have two? Is that okay? First of all, I think no surprise, I would I would get rid of VAR. That would be the first thing. Yeah, that'd be. I think that would immediately improve the match going experience, and it would certainly save me a lot of headaches every week writing about it. So, yes, VAR straight into room 101, please. That would be my first thing. Secondly, a wee bit more personal. My son goes to games. He's a wheelchair user, and he often, not always, but comes up against problems in terms of accessing games. And I think disability access into games is something we really need to look at in terms of the experience that disabled supporters have. Previously, he would go and he would sit with all his friends, and he'd have that atmosphere. Now, at many away games, he's put to the side, or he has to sit in with the home fans and all that sort of thing. So my magic wand would be, yeah, let's get disabled access into all away ends at grounds as well. And some of them have it, and it's great. And there's a lot of clubs doing fantastic work in this sphere. Motherwell have been fantastic with them. They've got a wee area for him where he can sit with his friends. But I understand it's difficult. Recently, we went to Capello for the horrendous cup exit that Motherwell had, and it's an old ground. There's limitations, and the people were fantastic with him. However, his friends all were in behind the goal, and he was, away at the main stand next to Morton supporters, and I think there is still an exclusionary experience for disabled people going to games that, if I had a magic wand and we had an unlimited budget, I'd love to see that sort of develop, and people really address that, because I think it's important.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't explored that topic at all. Yeah, must be tricky for clubs, in one case, when so many of our grounds are old.
Yeah.
But really, it is 2024. There is no excuse for not having, grounds that are accessible to all.
I think Kelly, I think they're worth mentioning. They put in a raised platform for their disabled fans behind the goal. And I think, because that's a major problem, if a lot of the places who do have disabled access, that it's at ground level. So often Jack can't see over the wall, or there's the stewards come out at the end of the game, so you can't see the action. So yeah, I think it's an area that we definitely need to address. It's not really good enough just to put a wee shelter up at the front of the stand. I think we've got to really think about the disabled experience. And again, it all comes down to money, I suppose, and resource. Again, it's difficult to do it. I understand that completely. And the people, as I say, people have been fantastic at trying to bend over backwards to accommodate them as much as they can. But as I say, oftentimes he'll be away from the actual support where he wants to sit, and the experience is completely diminished because of that. So yeah, I would love to see that become a more sort of prominent topic that we raise.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more digging into that as well. I think that's a really important issue. Great. Okay, Graeme, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it as well, mate. Thank you. Anytime.
And yeah, really looking forward to reading whatever you guys are going to publish in the Herald in due course on improving Scottish football. So
yeah, subscriptions are available, everyone. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, big thanks again for coming on, and a big thank you to everyone who was listening. This podcast was produced by Edinburgh Documentary Films, which is a film and media company co-founded by me, Kieran Hennigan. So we make documentaries for TV and cinema, but we also work with companies and brands to help them tell their stories in impactful and meaningful ways. You can find out more at edinburghdocs.co.uk, and please contact me directly if you'd like to talk about any potential projects.